Evening. Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting of the School Board of Upper Dublin School District of Upper Dublin, excuse me. I am the new chair of the Finance Committee, Vanessa Good. We have Joan Ludwig and Amy Franczyk here, who are the new Finance Committee personnel. I don't think we have anything else to discuss right up front, so we're going to start off with our first presentation, which is the Technology Budget Review from our Director of Technology.
So, good evening, everyone. And I will try to be brief and not be passionate and excited and be detailed. But so let's begin with our technology budget preview. The bulk and then the meat of the presentation is really in the spreadsheet where we break down numbers and categories. The initial presentation is an important pause to provide context, to provide some vision and also some reflection to set the stage for the budget. So we start with representing the technology budget as a small slice of our much larger budget. So that represents a 1% slice. And so that's our financial commitment and expenditure out of the budget of the district towards technology, both information technology and instructional technology, aside from staff. Right? And our staff consists of a network administrator, an assistant network administrator, 2 technicians for 7 campuses, and 1 instructional technology specialist. And I'm prefacing that because later we're going to be talking a little bit about staffing. And in my 2.5 years here, we haven't brought up staffing yet. But we're at a place where we have enough of a foundation that we need to begin having that conversation. That department supports what you see here. So underneath technology, we have oversight over our district devices and our one-to-one program, our AV equipment and classroom refresh, network devices, software and operations, our virtual servers, our backups, our security, our productivity tools, e-discovery, our communication protocols and tools, and the integration of instructional platforms. And in addition, that budget and that small team support integration across curriculum, business, pupil services, facilities, security, transportation, and human resources. In a very short time, we've become a leader in the region. And we do that by doing quite a lot with a little. It's a lot of creativity, a lot of innovation, a lot of thoughtful planning, and a lot of grit to make all of this happen. When I take that 1% slice, there are the pieces that we see, and that is the green and the blue. And then there are the pieces that are invisible, and those are the oranges and the yellows. So we think about the devices our students and teachers are using, the classroom AV equipment that you see, but behind the scenes, we have a lot that happens in terms of replacing our IT infrastructure, administrative software, SmartNets, licensing, etc. So I'm going to break down the budget into just the big buckets, and we'll start with our instructional priorities. So when we think of where we were 2.5 years ago, so I started 3 years ago, a month from now, and the district in 2015, we had a 1-to-10 ratio of devices to students. Our students took field trips into the 21st century, and it was a challenge, right? It took as much work to plan that field trip. You had to reserve this special cart. You had to wait 20 minutes for the devices to boot up, and then they would last about 20 minutes before you had to plug them in again. We realized that the world had moved far ahead. The paradigm that we grew up with as students, where our teachers were the conduit of content and students were the receptacle, was really no longer valuable or applicable and doing a disservice to everyone. especially since we know we live in an age where information skills and knowledge is going through this very quick and rapid iterative cycle, and exponential growth. And the skill that our kids need is to be knowledge workers, synthesizing and evaluating information to collaboratively construct and communicate knowledge. And that becomes a real shift. So we had a vision for what we wanted to do and where we wanted to go. But to realize that vision, we need training. To have training, you need access. And to have access, you need equipment. So this drove our vision and our initiative. And now our goal is to sustain and accelerate that work. So we're in an exciting place now, instructionally, where we have a strong foundation. And we want to maintain our commitment looking at these lenses of access, the tools and resources that we use. Ongoing professional development that's really focused around transformative use, personalization, efficient feedback, and differentiation. And then innovation development. So even though innovation development is a small part of the budget, a large part of that comes through careful and thoughtful coordination with our Education Foundation and our PTOs and our public library. Right? Really looking at opportunities to accelerate that innovative work. And now it's come to a point where it also includes our peer districts. This year was the first year that I've put in for a major impact, and that would be an additional staff. So earlier when I was talking about that small staff that we have, our IT expenditure and our staff are around 50 to 60% of what a peer district has. And by far and away, the place that we could have the largest acceleration of our return on investment is with an additional instructional technology specialist. Our peer districts about our size or smaller tend to have at least 2 instructional technology specialists in addition to other instructional coaches. 1 at the secondary level and 1 at the elementary level. Currently, our teachers experience professional development. They become very excited around these pieces that I just highlighted. They have these powerful takeaways, but it's really not until you are doing the practice and you have that resource, that instructional technology specialist, like you would leverage a library media specialist, to have that specialist working with you, that you really get to actualize that change. The wait time for our faculty right now is between 2 and 3 weeks. They put in a request to Mr. Lieberman, and he puts them on their calendar, and that's his out time. And then that calendar is always full. We'd love to get that down to a week. Right? So within a week, someone will be able to work with you to take that learning that happened in that in-service day and accelerate it immediately. And really, this is our mechanism for maximizing teacher effectiveness. With respect to our technician team, the information technology side of the house, the instructional technology specialists can serve double duty. There's a lot of help ticket requests, and they tend to happen with user error, right? It's just the user. And it's an opportunity, so when I have a technician who goes out to a building to help with recalibrating a board, they come in during the teacher's prep and recalibrate the board. An instructional technology specialist comes in and says, let me teach you how to recalibrate the board, and let me work with you and your students. How are you guys using this board together? It tends to be a classroom teacher, a veteran classroom teacher with years of experience, and can bring that to bear in the way that an information technology technician can't. They don't have that expertise. And when we talk about what an ITS, an instructional technology specialist, does, is they really are helping with this shift. So technology aside, this is the teaching and learning continuum. Right? We start with compliance-based instruction, which is what we're really used to. We experience that in our lives most of the time. And mostly because compliance-based instruction is very efficient for the teacher. It's not very effective for the student. We know that engagement and empowerment-based instruction are much more effective for the student and for the learner, but they're much more onerous for the teacher. It's very hard to gauge who's doing what, who gets what, to give feedback to kids as work unfolds. And this is where technology can be an accelerator of that work and a support for that work, using these tools to shift practice along the continuum, making thinking visible, empowering real-time feedback for learners, etc. The next big pillar of the budget is our ongoing classroom workstation refresh. So before I came here, there was a significant pause in attention to our classroom workstation refresh, the audiovisual within our rooms. And a lot of it had been provided through the largesse of our PTOs, which was great, but it did end up in this cornucopia of different manufacturers' makes and models, which are really onerous to support. So we have developed an aggressive refresh cycle that will get all the buildings completed by 2020, 2021. And it's an equitable cycle. So it's all buildings at the same time, with the exception of the high school, which even though its equipment is 8 years old, is still a whole lot newer than our other buildings. So by 2020, 21, we want to have all of our buildings, including the high school, done, and then we can enter a sustained and predictable 5-year refresh cycle. The picture on top that you see shows the contrast between what we currently have on the left and what the new equipment looks like on the right. And that equipment will always change. We don't know what the tool will be that we're using. We just know what the goal is. When I have a bunch of kids together, I need to make thinking visible. I need to be able to mirror devices. I need to be interactive, intuitive, and I can't have my teacher always tethered at the front of the room. And then we have our final big bucket, which is the invisible pieces, our infrastructure. So currently, we bring in 600 megabytes per second into the district as our bandwidth. We are going to very soon want to get that up to at least 1 gig. To do that, we need to have a 10 gig backbone between all of our buildings, because you never want to hit a ceiling. And then eventually we'll start exceeding 1 gig. That ongoing backbone preparation will take a couple more years to get all the pieces in place, with the exception of Sandy Run. So Sandy Run, we still have to decide what we're doing with Sandy Run before we then can develop that timeline. Our wireless. So the wireless in this room, that unit right there, and the wireless in this building will be end of service in a week. So right at that point in time, we can no longer buy the extended warranty that we are currently buying for our wireless equipment. And again, this was something where the purchases were made without a refresh plan. And so we are going to begin a process of a refresh plan. And at the same time, we have to make it practical. We can't do what the MCIU recommends, which is do your whole district at once. Yes, that's the best way to do it, but we did not buy enough Bitcoin. So as a result, we're going to do this in a phased protocol, and then enter, again, a predictable cycle. And last, we have our data center refresh. So we have a data center. Unlike the pictures that you'll see on the web, ours is just one rack, but it's a rather expensive rack, around $200,000 to replace. And as we plan for replacing that, we want to look at some options. There are pieces of the data center that you need to have internal to the network, but there are pieces where we can have that external to the network on some Amazon Web Services would be a natural place to go. With that come considerations, like we need a redundant connection to the internet, because if we are counting on those services internally, we always need to count on being able to get to them externally. So that's the map. Those are our big buckets. And with that, we can jump into the spreadsheet. Sort of point out some areas where we have some significant shifts, things that are staying the same, and others that are predictions. So you see down the middle our projection for 18-19. And we have pretty much stable across the board. We don't anticipate any significant changes on our expenses. Some will likely go up a little, while others will drop down. Again, this is preliminary budget because it's really not until springtime that those changes tend to manifest. One blip that you'll notice right away is professional development for 18-19. And it just goes up that year and then comes down. One of the things that we started our initiative, the year we started our, at the summer of 2015, ISTE, International Society for Technology and Education, was here in Philadelphia for their international conference. We sent a team of teachers and administrators. Next fall, I would like to invite our teachers to apply to present at ISTE. It will be back in Philadelphia. That budget amount includes sending a team of 20. I would love to send a team of 20 from Upper Dublin across our district and pay for our presenters to go. So that's a vision and a goal. After that, I want to, not always rob for professional development from curriculum, but be able to sustain sending presenters to regional conferences, have our teachers apply and showcase the good work that they're doing. As we scroll down, we're going to go to our lease hardware. So this year we are coming at the end of our first 3-year cycle. And in subsequent presentations in the late winter, early spring, we're going to sort of review what that rollover and upgrade looks like. But what you see there is the recurring amount to support our one-to-one minus our technology fee, right? So our technology fee, you see in the upper right corner, in the past 2.5 years, has brought in approximately $500,000. So you're looking at about $170,000 a year coming in. We started with a technology fee of $70, and we've moved it now down to $57. It's an odd number with an interesting story. And next year, we're going to move into at a $50 rate as an annual rate, which is comparable to many of our peer districts. And it's a comfortable place to be when you're in good company that way. The 465 is the upper end of what I project. Unlike past years where we did PEPM pricing or CoStar's pricing with a few vendors, we had them compete. This year I'm going to do a full RFP. We've had students evaluate models that we'll use moving forward, and typically with an RFP we're going to come in much better than that cost. Scrolling down, you see this big bucket of the invisible, right? So, I mean, we use a lot of these tools, right? So we see Schoology. We don't always think about, the cost associated with it, which within the grand scheme of things is rather small. But we do have some big pieces, right? Like a recurring $50,000 a year for the fiber we lease. Our buildings are too far apart. We will never be able to afford laying down fiber. So we lease our fiber between our buildings. Internet services, et cetera, et cetera. And for all of these, we project about the same. I have one placeholder in there for a tool called ClassLink. It's a placeholder because the MCIU right now is negotiating consortium pricing for ClassLink. It's a single sign-on solution. So depending on your grade level, you may at any point in time be having to sign into between 8 and 14 different platforms, Naviance, iExcel, et cetera, et cetera. ClassLink becomes a single sign-on solution. You sign in once, all of your apps come up, eFinance, this, that, whatever it is, they just all populate, and you're in. It's a tremendous efficiency. I don't know if we want it at 12,000, so I have it there as a placeholder right now as we evaluate. And then when we scroll down, this is where we get to our classroom refresh. So when we first started the process, it was we had projected a lot more for 17-18, and we came in a lot less through some aggressive bidding. So that's the cap of what we're looking at for our classroom refresh across the district to complete all the buildings by 2020, 2021. And then we'll phase into a much less expensive 5-year cycle. Here you see the map of the high school wireless. So a high school wireless refresh comes in, if we were to do it all at once, and have this building ready with a 10 gig backbone, that would be $200,000. You see here I've staggered it, so there are components that we can do and phase over time, sort of make that more manageable. And then we will begin a cycle. I've had Thomas Fitz and Fort Washington in there just as examples. It really doesn't matter which elementary school we start with, because just 2 summers ago, we upgraded half the wireless in all of our elementaries. And our elementaries, their 10 gig backbone is almost complete. So the additional cost will be much less. Obviously, an elementary is smaller, but there's a domino. If I replace all the access points in Fort Washington, in that same year, I have the opportunity to take all of the newer APs from Fort Washington, put them all over into Thomas Fitz, and take out all the old one from Thomas Fitz. So this interesting domino starts happening, but it's the same with our classroom refresh. It's this big jigsaw, and we're trying to get it all so that I can predict a room, and I have all the equipment in a given room is around the same age. And then we have the data center is just somewhere, it's a note out there. We just know we need to begin thinking of that. And that will probably be a 2020, 2021 item. Questions?
I'll kick off. 2 thoughts. One, do any of these replacement of capital tech equipment, do any of them qualify or belong on our 5-year capital plan?
Do you want to chime in?
You will note that Mr. Lester is sitting in the back of the room, and part of the reason for that is planning so that we have more integration between technology and operations. So my initial reaction is no, but the 3 of us will be having conversations about that as how we want to move forward. Most things that we use for technology, and Mr. V would certainly I think agree with this. I should not say certainly. Useful life, right, is usually under what we would do for a capital type of project.
But even say like the infrastructure things, I could be wrong about this, but instead of the actual devices.
So I think it's a really, it's one of the items that I have for our January MCIU Tech Council. Just looking at the practice of our neighbors, and I'm sure it's something that Spray can follow up with her cohort as well. It's interesting, right? Because an access point will last me 8 years. It costs $500.
Right.
Right, or $700
That
or $800.
right.
When I buy a lot of them, right? Whoa, now I'm spending $100,000. And so how do we classify that, right? And how are others classifying those? Are they doing that
Or
as
how
capital?
does GASB allow us to?
Well,
Right. What
really
will
is.
we be allowed to do, right? In terms of yeah.
And it really is more of a GASB consideration. 5 to 7 years on a device like that is
not
really not capital.
capitalized.
Even if you
Right.
spend $50,000 or $100,000 on it.
And I think we were able to do that with our core switch. But again, that's, you have a single item
Right.
around $80,000, $70,000, $80,000, right? It's going to last us for at least 8 years, that kind of thing. So it'll be interesting.
My other kind of, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say whether we call it capital or not, or how it's structured in terms of. No.
Yeah, but it says it is. It's very.
Here, you want this one?
So yeah, I sound louder now. So whether it's called capital or not, or how it's accounted for, one thing that I would like to see is once we get into these sustainable refresh cycles, I mean, we should never get to the point where we get to the AP is at end of life and we can't even buy the really expensive long-term extended warranty. We should just never get there. We should, just like we've discussed with buses, we should be on a sustainable, predictable cycle where effectively, even though we have these really expensive items or lots of really small items or whatever it is, we have this large expense that happens every 8 years. We should divide that by 8 and account for it every year as a predictable thing and set that money aside, even if we're virtually doing that. Like, I'm not sure exactly how it's accounted for, but I think the question Vanessa's asking, the way I would ask it is, once we get into sustainable refresh cycles for whether it's school buses or closet electronics for the network or APs or leased equipment for Chromebooks for the students or whatever it is, these classroom, front of classroom type equipment that we know have to be replaced, that are only going to last a certain number of years and in aggregate are really expensive, I think we should be budgeting for it every year and accounting for it every year so that when we get to that time, we don't have to say, well, where are we going to find $100,000 to replace all the PoE switches in the closets in the high school? I mean, that shouldn't have to be a question. We should already have that money set aside. But I don't know what the magic incantation is in terms of
Right.
GASB or anything else.
Right,
But
it might not be on this, but
Yeah,
it
it ought to be somewhere.
Right, and I think that's where between our two cohorts, we can at least, we're not the only district asking the same question. And then once we have a solution that other districts are doing, that's why we hire solicitors. And we run that solution by them and say, is this kosher? Because exactly, yeah, they would be great because these bubbles will come. As much as I can work to navigate the jigsaw and lay it all out and make it modular, the bubble will come. And if I know it's coming, I want to be able to plan for it for all of us. Your next question?
Yeah, my next question is going to show my real lack of knowledge of technology. Is there any opportunity for us to have concern over, opportunity isn't the right word, over the loss of net neutrality?
So what impact that will have on education will be really interesting to watch over the next few years. The one immediate impact that it has is it's been fantastic fodder for our social studies curriculum, especially in the middle school and high school. Yeah. Wow, what a catalyst for kids. I mean, that day, kids were watching it live here in school,
really?
and then right away there's just
Civics.
#1 Google search, right? From just boom,
Civics
boom, boom.
I get.
Yeah, it was fantastic. So in that way, it was a good thing. You'll notice also here, everything with an asterisk is E-ratable, right? So we get a 40% reimbursement on those items with an asterisk right after our expenditure. Right now. We have $180,000 left to recoup. We have to spend $500,000 to get it. But
Right.
so when I look here at my high school wireless refresh, and you're looking at, all right, so that's $146,000 just for the high school this year. That's E-ratable, right? So you're looking at 40% of that coming back to us, and so we want to leverage that. E-rate has 2 categories. One is Category 1, which is how much we pay for the internet. Then Category 2 for these infrastructure pieces that connect us, the pipeline from the internet to the kid. I don't know if that will be renewed under the current administration. So
there's a possibility of some impact.
there's always a possibility of a significant impact, right? It's the new normal. But if at the very least, it becomes an opportunity for students to engage and the public to engage in advocacy for democracy.
Yeah, okay. Just thought I'd ask that question.
In concept, net neutrality, the specifics of net neutrality should have little impact on school districts' access to the internet and cost for that access. One place it could have impact is we have only recently in the technology industry been able to sort of assume that almost everybody has internet access at home. That's really a pretty new ability to assume, and it really was transformational to be able to assume that. Because people have it now and aren't going to really enjoy giving it up, it is likely, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, that even at increased cost, we can still make that assumption. But it is something to watch, that if we could no longer make the assumption that every student has internet access at home, and it isn't true that every student does, and we have ways to work around those
Right.
edge cases, but, roughly speaking, every student either has access or we can find a way to get them access. If that were to change, that would change things a lot. And that's something to watch. But my prediction is that won't happen, but it's something to watch.
Anyone else with questions, committee?
So, my question has to do with the instructional technology specialist. As a preface, I mean, I know we underspend on that. I mean, I remember things I've read, you should be spending 20% of your technology budget on professional development and support, at least. I don't know, maybe even more. But the question is, how does what the person that you are suggesting we hire overlap with or synergy with the instructional support coaches that we're talking about for the elementary schools?
Sure. So the instructional coaches and instructional technology specialists, there's a lot of synergy in their work. But the difference between an instructional technology specialist working with a teacher would be the same difference as a literacy specialist working with a teacher and a math specialist working with a teacher. So all three of them bring to bear a skill set around differentiation, classroom management, scaffolding, inquiry. That foundation is among all of them, and then they become a specialist, right? So the instructional technology specialist, because if I need to learn how to paint, right, I want to paint something, I need to learn how to properly hold a brush, how to properly mix my paints, etc. Right? There's a part of it that's like, this is how you use the tool. And they know how to onboard kids with the tool, scaffold the tool, to do that within the context of the lesson. Same with the math specialist, same with the English specialist. So that's, for me, the best way to describe it is think about the difference between an ELA specialist and a math specialist. It would be the same kind of thing. Same foundation in instruction, and now you have the specialist is the specific content area, and building capacity in this content area is the work of that specialist. So an instructional technology specialist really is a jack of all trades, but with a heavy capacity for saying, this specific workflow takes kids' skill set for digital citizenship, applied digital skills, et cetera, moves it forward while doing it through the lens of this inquiry-based project.
Just going to ask a couple of new person questions, if that's all right.
Yeah.
I'd like to piggyback on what Joan was asking about. When you have one staff person, and I think it would be great to change the lead time down from 2 to 3 weeks to 1 week to get a question answered, would this person's role also be a way to build capacity within the building to maybe have that individual develop, say, building level coaches, or establish, I know in some of the buildings I've worked at, we have Tech Tuesday, and that's our morning meeting for half an hour, and we look at specific modules or specific programs. Is that something that you're thinking about? Because I think it would be a great investment potentially to extend.
Sure. So we have, in each building, we have tech reps. So a tech rep is a full-time teacher, has no special release period, and is paid a very, very small additional stipend. The tech rep is your point of contact historically in the district for it doesn't work, right? And what do I do? So the tech reps are sort of the troubleshooter, first line of defense. Did you press restart? Did you shut it off and turn it on? And that deals with 99% of our problems. But after that, right, then the tech rep will go and diagnose and document a work order for my technicians to address. In the past few years, I have started working with the tech reps to build their capacity around instructional implementation. And so again, they don't have that extra prep period, but during our in-service days, they are now leading professional development, along with other just teacher leaders, right? Those people who are out there and willing to share. The instructional tech specialist invests heavily already in those people. I want to build capacity with you so you can help others. And so having a second one, you essentially accelerate that. You also allow, because you differentiate elementary from secondary, for a whole lot more specialization, right? For that person to say, you know what, this project you want to do, this other person in your building also wants to do the same thing. Let me bring you together now. That kind of connection doesn't happen as frequently because you only have one circulating. But yes, so absolutely, we do have a mechanism in place, and we are building that capacity, and we just want to move that forward.
So is that position in our budget yet? Okay.
At this point in our discussions, we have 7.6 FTE requests. And after the winter break, we will begin to work with Mr. Sigafus on staffing and the staffing request. I don't know that we're going to be able to follow through on all of the requests that we have, but we certainly want our budget writers to explain to us what they see the need, and then we will have to prioritize. So at this point, no decisions have been made, other than I believe we are going to prioritize the 4 elementary instructional support specialists. But we have a lot of conversation ahead of us.
And actually, I think there may have been a few other positions submitted in major impact forms, which we will start on, as Dr. Wheeler said, combining everything and pulling it all together and looking and starting to prioritize all the requests, not just personnel.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from any other board members? Mark?
I just want to follow up on the additional instructional technology specialist. I think obviously another position is very expensive and needs to be gone through the process and prioritized. But the value of this one, I want to highlight in a way that I don't think Phil did. I think one of the great successes of our technology implementation has been that we had everybody on board, we did all the training, we integrated it with the curriculum. It wasn't we threw Chromebooks at the students and let's see what they can do with it. And you do read all those stories, and we are sent all those stories by our constituents saying, this doesn't work, why are you putting all this effort into this? But it does work for us because we have put that effort in and we have truly integrated it, and it has been transformational, and we're making sure that it remains that way. And that's because we have people like instructional technology specialists, We have a instructional technology specialist, and we have, a lot of people pulling together to make that work. But we've had great success because of that strategy, and doubling down on that strategy, literally, would make a really big difference. I mean, this. We know we're understaffed in this area already, and we know this is a method for success. It is proven.
Can I ask a slightly different take on that? On this question is, do you have a sense of where individual teachers are, broadly speaking, on the SAMR model that we've talked about? I mean, I think in my mind, and I don't know if it's really a district goal, is part of implementing the Chromebooks was to move us along that pathway. And I mean, I know that the instructional support or the instructional technology specialist would help in that. But do you know? I mean,
so I returned to this slide. It's another way to think of the SAMR model. The SAMR model represents a continuum, and we're always in all of those buckets. I learn something new, I often substitute right away. I use it in the way I've always used this other thing. I'm using B the way I used A. And as I work with it, I realize I can do things that A couldn't do. or with compliance, engagement, and empowerment. There's times when compliance is really important. I need to do the drill and practice. It's just, I need to build your fluency. You're going to do drill and practice. And then they find ways to do drill and practice that are different, that move along this continuum. I think that all of our teachers have visited engagement and empowerment. I think some of them spend a lot more time there than others. A lot of teachers spend a lot of time in compliance and have only dipped their toe. So have our faculty grown along that continuum? Absolutely, in tremendous ways, and in ways that surprise me all the time. Will that growth ever end? No. Like, it just never does, right? That's it's just always going to be, hopefully we have that learner mindset where it's like, all right, I did that. I did it so well. I can't wait to do it better. How do I do it better? Please critique me. But that kind of excitement and acceleration really happens when I do it not in isolation, when I partner with another adult, when I reach out to take a risk. You're going to show me, we're going to show my kids, and that's the thing about an instructional tech specialist, right? In an ideal world, and when Brad Lieberman is able to do his work in an ideal way, he meets with teachers before, then he co-teaches with them, then he meets with them after they've spent some time doing it independently. And that feedback, just like with our kids, right? Feedback is the most powerful teacher. And when you're a teacher and you try something new and you do it with your kids, you're kind of inferring feedback. You don't really know, not until you have that other adult working with you. That's the powerful accelerator.
Okay, any other questions?
Just real quick, the spreadsheet, looks like it's from 1 million to maybe 1.15 million. Last year, what would that number have been?
The year before that?
Well, last year's school year. Yeah, the year before that.
2016-17?
Yeah.
I'll have to get back to you on that.
So you were budgeted last year.
So like right now is 17-18.
Right.
I'm coming in a little bit under. I sat with Jen the other day.
Closing out last year.
Ben Baldessano, right. So I'm looking at 17-18, and I was looking at how much I've spent already, how much I still plan on spending. We crunched numbers, right, and I was in the green. I did first I was in the red.
Yeah.
Then we realized there was a minus where there should have been a plus. And then I did a happy dance and left really excited. So I budget very conservatively. Like, worst case scenario, this is how much I'm going to spend. Before I take things out to bid, before I make people fight for our money.
It used to be, I thought the technology budget was like $750,000. I remember that number from years ago.
Used to
Oh,
be
I remember when it was
$475,000.
Yeah.
Was that?
475.
475.
I remember that, yeah.
So we've been inching it up.
Oh, we took a huge jump when we went to Chromebooks.
Right,
And we
of
also
course.
took
Right.
a pause on some other things, but we've doubled
Right.
the budget.
Yeah, and
a
it's
few years
and still within that space, right? We are, 50, 60% less than a lot of our peers
Right.
in this space, and we do a lot of very creative things, right? We build capacity with teacher leaders, and that's a way that we get at a lot of work, and that's fantastic. But elbow grease is only sustainable for so long, right? So we're making those strategic investments, and hopefully in a really guided and collaborative way.
Go ahead, Titi.
Okay. With that said, where do you see, or do you see anywhere some gains in in savings? For example, I mean, I'm thinking textbooks, but also maybe productivity in areas where it took a person to do things that now through technology use we can save some money.
There are a lot of workflows that we have streamlined. It's one of the reasons I'm asking for an instructional tech specialist and not another technician. So the technology definitely has saved us there. The fact that we are Google for Work and then we went with Chromebooks has let me keep the IT side of the house where it is. So those are some significant savings. There are the small savings that we did, right? We went away from a hosted commercial website service, right, to something that we homemade ourselves, right? And so going from $25,000 a year to $300 a year. So those are some savings. In terms of workflow efficiencies, those are really hard to quantify. We hear them all the time, though. Administrators, teachers, professional learning teams, the capacity for collaboration, for shared documents, for building curriculum, the fact that our entire curriculum sits in shared Google Drive folders, where curriculum is now a living document. It's something that people are over in the barn constantly coming back to, saying, we just did this, we're going to modify X, Y, and Z, and every teacher is accessing that, is using that live, living curriculum. Curriculum writing used to be, in most districts, we write curriculum, and when we put it in a binder, and it sits there, and then every teacher does their own thing. That's not happening anymore. Not with Google Drive and Schoology. What I build, I can use year after year, improve year after year, and we're doing it collaboratively. It's very powerful. So there, by far and away, those efficiencies exist as well. When I got here, we started saving a lot of money, but we turned that right away around, and I think it was Vanessa said something. She thanked me, and I said, oh, no, don't thank me. We're going to grow this budget in a way that we can build in a sustainable foundation for our programs. But again, it's done in a very frugal and thoughtful way.
I have one more question. You mentioned the different platforms or boards and stuff that were funded by PTOs, PTAs, and stuff like that. Do you have a list now or something that they can refer to and that you would support, so we don't have that disparity of all
yes,
different
so what
things?
I've asked actually our PTO leadership is that they're to please consult with your school and your community to fund innovation and passion. Do you want to have buddy benches and that whole curriculum that goes with it, a community garden, because your landscape allows for it? That's fantastic. But if it is a core part of our teaching and learning, then it's our responsibility to fund it. That whether or not I get a new projector, because mine is dying, shouldn't be because my PTO sacrifices, X percent of their funds. And that's been a shift since I got here. And one that the PTO really, really welcome. Thank you. They're deeply appreciative because now they're getting after teacher passion and passion projects and something that's really going to impact their immediate community and not hardware.
Okay. Well, I think that's it for this presentation. Do we have any follow-up on that? No? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All righty. Next up, we have a curriculum budget review. Ms. Morrison?
Good evening. I have to say, last year at this time, while all of you were enjoying your 7 p.m. meeting, I was Skyping in from Berlin, and it was like 3 in the morning. So this is refreshing, and I feel wide awake. But that was, I Skyped in. It was Dr. Wheeler's idea, and Phil hooked me up, and so hopefully I'll be a little more clear in person than I was last year. So anyway, thank you for the opportunity to present. I wanted to talk a little bit about our budget priorities, which really are about supporting and sustaining current programming. All of you likely know that over the last 5 years we have done tremendous work in curriculum with the implementation of curricula in science, mathematics, social studies at the secondary level, English language arts, K-12, really almost every single curricular area has undergone review, which we're hoping to finish up under the guise of Understanding by Design by 2018, which is our goal. You'll also notice that there is an asterisk next to some of the items we're bringing forward. If you see that, that indicates it was discussed at our curriculum summit, and I will talk about that right now. So in the spring of 2015, we began a new process of how to do curriculum review. Mr. Vinogradov alluded to it that in the past when we did curriculum reviews, we did them on a cycle every 7, 8, 9, sometimes 10, 11 years. And I think and if you think about the production of textbooks, which was the primary mode of distributing curriculum, it made sense. Probably a new textbook would come out in that timeline. And it worked for us for a while, but by 2015 we realized that in order to not be caught short, and in order to have the most up-to-date kind of curriculum, we need to do something called a continuous curriculum review, which Ms. Good is a little bit like a continuous refresh cycle, only of curriculum, that you're always able to go back into it in a just-in-time kind of way. So ideally with the backward design model, you've just finished a unit, and you're able to go back in, and you're able, with your team, and you're able to take a look and say what worked, what didn't work, what were our assessments like. Obviously, the luxury in terms of time of being able to do that is not always afforded to teachers, but we try very, very hard to support their work. And we really do have a culture of teachers coming to the curriculum office so that they can do that. And I think that it's a real strength. I think that teachers need time. And when they have time to think together very deeply, I think students are able to very deeply consider the curriculum that's being brought forward. So I'll go through some of the items that we want to discuss this evening. Last year in January, we implemented a K-5 STAR adaptive assessment program, and that went very, very successfully. We had begun conversations already the previous spring around what kind of adaptive assessment we wanted, and we landed on STAR. This year, this year we implemented that same program for students in grades 6 to first 10, and then we realized with some keystone testing we wanted to get some STAR information from grade 11, and we added that as well. It has gone extremely well. Our teachers at the secondary level, well, I'd say elementary and secondary level, are really enjoying it as a resource. We currently have our 7th grade English Language Arts team doing regular monthly testing, and they're sharing the results of that test with their students so that there's a transparency for students about how they're doing. And we're going to use that as a pilot to see exactly what impact that has on students and their learning. We are just at the beginning of it. We've done one full-scale test, and we'll be doing another one in January. And you can see there is a $6,000 budgetary increase from last year so that we can include the 11th grade students. So there's the sort of big ideas of backward design. Why do we do backward design? And there is our motto, backward design by 2018. The more you do this kind of work, the more you can see opportunities for interdisciplinary design. One of the probably strongest pieces of evidence is at the elementary level, when we redesigned through the expertise of our teachers, Kim Small and some university partners, our science program. We didn't just write those to the Pennsylvania standards, we also designed to the Next Generation Science standards. And then upon reviewing our English Language Arts curriculum and implementing ReadyGen, they are also aligned to the Next Generation Science standards. So now when you put science and English Language Arts together, suddenly you know exactly where in our ELA program we have a big idea that we also have present in our science program, and now you have some real synergy because you're reading about science, you're doing experiments about science, and you get exactly that kind of articulation you're looking for. Also, when Mr. Vinogradov entered with the Chromebook implementation, we had already begun our backward design work, and it just fits so nicely into our ability to design online and to have a continuous update, because we never want to be in a position where we're outdated in our curriculum. Thank you so much. Hoping there weren't any nuts in those brownies, so just kidding, I'm fine. It's a little dry in here. I have one right there in my bag, I'll be fine. One of the most exciting things that's happening, and is kind of a curriculum answer to Dr. Ludwig's question around the SAMR model. Both the middle school and high school have been partnering around personalized learning, both in very different ways, very personal to each school. And Mr. Vinogradov and I have been working very closely with both teams. And you can see that honeycomb model right there. The honeycomb sort of symbolizes the cornerstone. And you know what? I can put a link in there to the Institute for Personalized Learning so you can take a look at it. But it models around those central three shapes, which are this idea that students, that there's mastery-based learning, that it's not just seat time, but we look at students and we move them along based on evidence of mastery. And so those really strong assessments in our UBD units can help us establish mastery-based learning, that we are very learner-centered, that there are multiple access points for learners, and that there's a customized learning path for students. We have now, our middle school team is looking at some possibilities for next year, and we'll give you some updates around that early in 2018. We're also looking at some STEM opportunities, again, with backward design. We have places in our science curriculum, particularly, although this is there's an opportunity for interdisciplinary work, where we are sending all of our middle school science teachers, 6 through 8, as well as Mr. Vinogradov, Ms. Small, our K-12 science coordinator, and I will be attending the MCIU Stemulate series, which is a very theoretical approach of how to infuse STEM into our curriculum. Well, you have to begin somewhere. We're going to begin with middle school science. You can see there's an allotment of some materials. So where can we build some bridges? Some of you are probably familiar with the 8th grade science program, where they're actually building amusement parks, but they're building them out of, some pretty shaky materials. Could we use like some really intentional materials to make those projects even more meaningful? Can we share those somehow with community? Can people come in and help students? So we'll be looking at that, and we're all pretty excited about that. There are many opportunities for STEM. STEM doesn't sit in one place, but that is one place for us to start. This is kind of a no-cost budgetary item for the 2018-19 school year, but this idea that we need to have a continuous curriculum review for mathematics, when we underwent our first review, we actually landed on a K-9, a K through 9th grade, 2 programs, and we didn't really research 10th, 11th, and 12th grade at that time because we didn't have the resources to do so. So now's the time to really look at things like what is the rigor, the focus, the coherence between our elementary program, our secondary program. There could be future cost potential with implementation in 2019-20, but we're also looking at free open source materials. We have a committee that's going to start in February. We're very excited, and we will keep you updated. And then finally, we have text and digital resources that we are requesting for English, Science, Social Studies, and World Language. Interestingly, some of these digital resources turn out to be rather more expensive than just a plain textbook. A plain textbook was a once-in-time purchase, but now there are these online programs that are interactive. So for example, in the area of social studies for 8th, 9th, and 10th grade, we have an American history textbook where teachers can push out primary source documents that can be scaled to a student's reading level. It's a fabulous tool to have. However, we have to pay for it yearly. So that's part of the consideration. And I will now turn it over to Dr. Miner.
Thank you, Ms. Morrison. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to start my portion of the presentation with our proposal, which was initially brought to the board last year with the adoption of foundations in kindergarten and first grade. At that time, we very intentionally put off the second grade implementation until the fall of 2018 because the difficulty of the foundations program in terms of the complexity of the work is extremely high if the students haven't had foundations already in first grade. And so that's an intentional final piece of foundations, is to put it into second grade next year. We will provide professional development, which is already scheduled and was put into this year's budget in 2018. And then the program, if you're not familiar with it, at the second grade level,
focuses on pattern assessments. Students do what's called marking up words. They really learn to break down the language, and then that allows them to have an intensive word study, developing transferable encoding and decoding skills. So the program does go through third grade. My familiarity with it from previous districts where I've worked is that I think it's most appropriate to end in the second grade. So this will be the final year of rollout. So we'll have a K-2 Foundations program, and that cost is $30,000. The second thing that I am proposing this evening is building out our guided reading libraries. As part of the ReadyGen curriculum, there is a built-in time between 40 and 60 minutes every day for small group guided reading instruction. Right now, we own all of the titles that come with the ReadyGen program, so that teachers have some books that come in their classrooms, and there are some books that come and live in a building library. Right now, though, if you kind of take a look at the picture that I provided there, and you see, for instance, all of the T books, that's a school district that has had guided reading for quite a while, and you can see that there are lots of books in there, lots of choices. The total number of ReadyGen choices for a T would be one of those boxes. And the reason that choice is important is that teachers within their classroom have students at a variety of reading levels, a variety of interest levels, and so for teachers to be able to go and pull resources exactly where that child needs to be reading in that moment in time, as well as at a broad array of interest, is really critically important for having a robust program. From the beginning of the ReadyGen program, I think there was always a realization, and Ava and I have spoken about this previously, that we would need to build out these libraries and give teachers more choices, and so that's what we're seeking to do here. Right now, I am requesting that we build out the libraries for grades K-3 first. There's two reasons for that. One is in kindergarten and third grade, students go through the levels the most quickly. So just the nature of those early grades kindergarten students, for instance, go from just learning letters to, having their first encounter with reading books. And then in first grade, they really become truly readers. So there's a lot of levels to go through. Also, the program that we are looking at right now, and I shouldn't say program, the resources that we're looking at right now are through Fountas and Pinnell, who provide our leveled literacy intervention, which is going extremely well in RTI, our text types intervention, which is going extremely well. And so that would allow us to have consistency. And they're rolling out only through third grade for next year. They'll roll out 4 and 5 in the following year, at which time I'll likely propose that we get those books as well. So this amount, $110,000, is a large number, but as you can see, that includes 800 leveled titles for students in grades K through 3. There's 6 copies of each. That's how you work in a guided reading group, typically is with 5 or 6 students. So that's 4,800 new books per building for a total of almost 20,000 books throughout the district. And it's something that we, I think, truly need at this point. Our libraries, our guided reading libraries, are inadequate to the task in this moment in time. The next piece is a request for classroom independent reading libraries. When you walk around in our classrooms, you will see that teachers have very different resources in terms of what they have in their classrooms. Many teachers, and this is not an uncommon thing in districts, but it's certainly the case here, have purchased the entirety of their classroom libraries either through their own pockets, they've gone to library sales, they've gotten Scholastic book points and gotten books those sorts of ways. And so the classroom library quality varies greatly room to room and is often not specific to the levels of children at that grade level and is more whatever the teacher was able to purchase in that given period of time. So again, looking to standardize classroom libraries so that when students are doing independent reading, which is critically important, I think the term up there is gaining mileage as readers, so time on task as readers, to really start to have an improved classroom library set for students to do that work. So that purchase price there represents K-3, 150 titles per classroom. Also with having students as readers in guided reading, the critical component to that is knowing what their instructional level is. So when we talk about students in guided reading, there are 3 levels: independent level, which is the books that students can tackle on their own; instructional level, which is those books that are in the ZPD, or zone of proximal development, which is what they're right now ready to learn but need guidance to do so. And so they work on those books with their teacher, and that's how they grow as readers. And then there are books that are at their frustrational level, which are books that are too high for them to read at this period of time, even with assistance from the teacher. In order to know what that level is and where to work with the student, we have to have a high quality assessment. Currently, we primarily use an assessment from reading A to Z. I think that it's important for us as we move forward to adopt a more standard approach, which would be, in this case, the recommendation is for the F&P benchmark assessment systems. Our reading specialists already use these assessments, but they have never been thoroughly trained in using them. They've just kind of figured it out on their own. So this is looking, this year in the spring, we're having professional development for our reading specialists. We will invite teachers, as they are interested, to also participate this year. And the proposal is to then buy those teachers the assessment kits. It is a 3-year process in terms of what you'll see in the spreadsheet, adding more and more teachers each year to using this tool and replacing the current tool they use, which is RAS, so that we have a consistent assessment that accurately levels our students. And then this is actually not in my budget proposal because this would come in personnel, but I did want to speak to it this evening. Many of our teachers were excited when they read a newspaper article about a program that Wissahickon has, where they have an invitation-only pre-K summer program for students who, on the springtime screening, indicate that they may need additional support to be kindergarten ready. So I was able to reach out to my counterpart at Wissahickon, and he was kind enough to share in great detail what it is that they do, and we would like to offer a program patterned after that. They've been running it for 5 years with great success. So we are proposing to screen our students incoming to kindergarten in the springtime. There will be a point system on that screener. Students who would indicate that they're not at this time ready for kindergarten would be invited to attend a free of charge summer kindergarten program. This would run at the same time as the rest of our summer scholars. We would continue to have a paid pre-kindergarten option for students who didn't need the extra support. So this would be in addition to that. We think it's appropriate to offer it at no cost in order to support the needs of our incoming students. In this slide, this is data from 2014 and 15, 16, and 17 school years in terms of our student achievement across all 4 buildings with the PSSA. And you can see that in grades 3, 4, and 5, in 3 cohorts of students over 3 years, we have not been able to break 80% proficiency. So that effectively means that between 20 and 25% of our students each year are not proficient in mathematics. And at this point in time, we feel like we need to take a systemic approach to looking at that. We think that those numbers are large enough that it's not about individual student intervention, but actually about what we're doing programmatically and instructionally. And to that end, Leah Howard led 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade teachers in collaboratives in the fall, where we reviewed the data, and the teachers were asked to specifically consider standards where we performed most poorly, and then theorize why they think that we may have those issues around those particular standards, and then come up with plans of action to improve in those areas. That is ongoing work. She continued it on the November in-service day, and we will continue it out throughout the spring. But 2 things that became very apparent, and so I wanted to budget for them, even though I don't at this point have a specific program, and I'm not certain that we will hit these dollar amounts, is first of all a need for a math fact fluency program. All of the teachers unanimously felt like students were coming in to 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade without an adequate math fact fluency. This is a really common issue in school districts that have adopted math programs like Eureka, like Everyday Math, like Singapore Math, that are much more about understanding the math than memorizing rote algorithms. And so a lot of schools have added a supplementary fact fluency program to ensure that simultaneous to that theoretical understanding is just the basic fact fluency. And fact fluency becomes extremely important when you think about the cognitive demands of rigorous math. If you're having to figure out the basic multiplication and addition facts on your fingers or with a lattice, something along those lines, you're not using that brain capacity for those higher level thinking skills in math. So we really need to tackle that pretty aggressively. At this point, teachers are being asked to review various online free trial programs and then come to a recommendation that I'll be able to share with the board through the Ed Committee in the spring. The other area that we want to look to fill is there are some areas where the Eureka curriculum doesn't align perfectly with the state standard. So one particular example is in Eureka in 5th grade, the curriculum focuses primarily on drawing geometric shapes and spends quite a bit of time on that. The state actually assesses not drawing shapes, but rather sorting them by their characteristics. And so we need to do some work in terms of reshaping the curriculum a little bit around that. So we are not sure exactly at this point what we might do in terms of some kind of supplement for that, but I wanted to budget some funds in case there was a need for that. So again, I will have more information as we do that review more carefully throughout the spring. And then at this time, Ms. Morrison and I will share the spreadsheet that represents our budget. I'll go first because elementary is first on here. So you can see that in our spreadsheet we have some historical data in the gray, what was spent in 2016, 2017, and then what was budgeted for this school year, 2017-18. And then next year's budget in the D column, and then looking out to 2021 with our best estimates of where we'll go. So again, here you can see things that were discussed at the Curriculum Summit have an asterisk. And in the case of new items, they're highlighted in pink. So you can see the Foundations Level 2, that $30,000 expense with looking at $5,000 for the following 2 years, just in terms of new classrooms that might need to be opened, those sorts of things. The Fonnes and Pinnell benchmark assessment system, which we discussed, the math fluency. There's an item on there, data management, that I have $15,000 budgeted for at this point. We are looking at possible alternatives to Performance Tracker. I don't know if that will end up being in there or not, and it's too early to say what that may be, but again, I wanted to put it in as a placeholder for the budget in case we do go down that path. You can see the math supplemental that was discussed. And then in the grayed out items, those are things that would no longer have a central office budget anymore. Junior grade books, leveled literacy intervention, text types, and ReadyGen at this point would all be turned over to building budgets for any consumables that would need to be repurchased. The training for those major programs that were in RTI, again, are grayed out. We don't need to continue with those this year. I have put a small amount in for additional foundations training for next year, knowing that some new teachers may come to 2nd grade. There may be some additional need for supporting that as we roll it out. And then the largest portion of PD is in that responsive PD category. I think we labeled it that for the first time last year. And I think Ms. Morrison and I both have the intention there to be able to have a flexible professional development budget that allows us to respond as our teachers have particular needs around programs or our students are not performing as well as we would like. So that's everything in the elementary. I'll let Ms. Morrison take over the secondary.
All right, I'll begin with our curriculum development. There's a fair amount of funds dedicated to continuous curriculum development that I think I already spoke to in terms of never being caught short and always being able to go back to look to make sure we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. You can see the new additions, the STEM middle school and high school science project to start thinking about actual materials, but not before we get really smart about what STEM looks like. continued social studies resources, the collection I alluded to, and you will hear some new information regarding 11th and 12th grade English courses in social studies at the January Education Committee, but there are funds set aside for that. We are beginning to drill down to places where, for example, you can see the planetarium. After discussions with Ms. Bray and Ms. Small and further discussions to include Dr. Clark and Mr. Vinogradov, I am going to begin requesting some funds for the planetarium, particularly around the curricular work that is aligned to our science program at the elementary and middle school. And then again, you can see the request for teacher subs. We've grayed out the writing-based curriculum. We used to work with professional development through Arcadia University, and the main provider of that professional development became a dean of a school on the West Coast, and he did try for several years to fly back because the work was so important to him and to us, but I think we are learning that that chapter has ended. Allocating some funds for personalized learning. As we move forward, we'd like to go a little deeper in terms of professional development, perhaps visit some sites. The Institute for Personalized Learning comes out of Wisconsin. We're currently visiting local sites that do personalized learning, but perhaps a visit is in order to see firsthand what can happen. You can see in terms of 612 mathematics, continue professional development, reading content area. Again, we've been having some great success partnering with the MCIU around those things. And again, that responsive PD so that we can have just-in-time differentiated PD for our staffs. And that concludes my comments regarding the proposed budget.
Thank you, Ms. Morrison and Dr. Miner. I guess we'll kick off with a couple questions. Just one quick question. Did I miss a conversation about why secondary 2021 is not filled in? Did I miss something there?
At this point, I had only budgeted through 1920. I think by the time you get to the third year, I haven't gone that far, but it does look like Dr. Miner did.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything there. Any other questions?
I was hoping we could talk a little bit about the guided reading piece.
Sure.
Great. I sit in on some guided reading sessions on a pretty fairly regular basis in another district. Can you just talk a little bit about what the current guided reading practice is in Upper Dublin? How many staff members are participating in this and utilizing it in their classrooms? One thing that wasn't mentioned, I know in my building we have several part-time reading specialists that come in to facilitate those sessions. And I didn't know if there were any potential personnel implications for this. Granted, it would be in another budget, but if you could just talk a little bit about the guided reading piece.
Sure, I would be happy to. It's actually a very hot topic. When ReadyGen was brought in as the curriculum, as I mentioned, it has whole group instruction, it has writing instruction, and it has small group instruction or guided reading instruction. In the 5th grade, small group may take on other kinds of forms like novel study, those sorts of things for students who no longer need to continue to move through the levels because they have advanced out of them. But for those lower primary grades, guided reading is critically important. As you know, I've been in the district for a year and a half, but as best that I can tell, historically, there was not a across-the-board push for guided reading when we had been using basal readers. It's not necessarily a practice that's associated with basal readers. And so our teachers are in very different places in terms of their readiness, their current practice around guided reading. Some of our teachers also hold a reading specialist certificate. They've been extremely well trained through college preparation, and they're being very successful in ReadyGen, although many of them feel that they need many more books than they currently have access to. Other teachers have never had training in guided reading, do not feel that they understand what's expected of them in this point in time, and so their practice is less rigorous, less strong than we would like it to be. And so one of the challenges that I face right now as director of elementary is how do I purposefully reach teachers wherever they are in terms of guided reading professional development. So we have focused on that quite a bit this year. So in the November full day in-service day, we had a Fountas and Pinnell trainer provide a full day of guided reading training for all of our K-3 teachers, K-2 teachers. We'll have 3 to 5 in February. So that will kind of be at least a blanket. Everybody has that full day experience. In addition to that, we have been privileged to partner with another school district that has a academic coach position, and that individual has come in, and for teachers who have volunteered, that person did 2 days last year, is doing 4 days this year, where they are coming in with ReadyGen materials and modeling guided reading lessons in our classrooms with our students. And teachers sit around, 13, 15 of them watch that and then debrief and then go in again. And he's kind enough to show his lesson plans. It's been extremely valuable. And in fact, our teachers enjoyed it so much they asked if we could bring him back again this year, and we are. We also are having a differentiated supervision opportunity for our teachers to study the guided reading book that Fountas and Pinnell have written, which is quite thick, and we're doing an ongoing book study with that. So we're really trying to offer a variety of different entry points for teachers that match where they are in terms of their understanding. My personal goal is that in 3 years, we will have what I would consider a model approach in all of our classrooms. It is time consuming to really instruct teachers, and of course we need to have the quality materials to get there, but we're a little all over the map right now, to be perfectly frank.
How do the classroom libraries, the guided reading libraries, and the libraries all fit together? I mean, which resources are building level resources, and why, what can be shared? I mean, I can imagine that you want to have some books in your room because you don't have time to go get them from a central resource. But it does seem like a lot of money. Maybe it's not when you think about books and libraries.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a lot of money. There's no question. When you talk about 20,000 books, $110,000 is, I don't think, an unexpected price for that number of books. So your question was initially, what are the differences between the 3 types of libraries? Our library media centers are very traditional. Our librarians do an excellent job of having new titles in there, titles that students are interested in, teaching research skills. They've been working with Mr. Vinogradov in terms of technology skills and research skills in the library. And so those are very kind of traditional models. And students check out any number of books, 1 to 3 books typically a week, and they can read those at home or in the classroom if they choose. A classroom library, one of the fundamental tenets when you are pulling students to a guided reading table for 40 to 60 minutes and you have 5 or 6 students with you at a time, is that the remainder of the students have to be doing purposeful literacy work. And the most purposeful literacy work, which may not be surprising, is actually reading books. That really, it's better than worksheets, it's better than projects with glue sticks. Reading books is really what gets people to be better readers. And so those independent classrooms, having libraries right there in the classroom, that if I'm a teacher and I have students with me at the table and Jen has just finished her book and can go quietly to the library and select another book and then continue to read, that's a really important resource. And those books are appropriately leveled to first grade rather than a big library we'd have to ask to go down the hall and pick and those sorts of things. So having books in classrooms is a long recognized, I think, important piece. What we're seeking to do in here is improve the quality, have it be more diverse in terms of cultural representations and those sorts of things. The most important piece, I think, in terms of where we are right now, is building out that guided reading library. When you have a second, let's say a first grade class, you may have students who are reading anywhere from an A level, which is really a pre-primer level, all the way through an X, a Y, a Z, a fifth grade level. And ReadyGen right now has a selection of books at a few of those levels, but certainly not all of the levels that a teacher might encounter. And so it's important for a teacher, in order to have all students grow, to be able to always have access to those instructional level books. And when you have a guided reading library, it's very different than a school library because you have that 6 copies of those titles, so that the teacher and the students are all reading the same book and can move through. Of course, that's not how we stock our building libraries, and those books aren't leveled specifically to those levels that allow you to always have that zone of proximal development where you're growing students but not frustrating them. And so books are really important. I mean, they're very expensive, but they are how children learn how to read, and there are these 3 distinct places where that would happen. So those building libraries, all teachers would have access. If I'm a 5th grade teacher and I have a student reading at a first grade level, I can go to that guided reading library and pull those books at that level that I need for my classroom. Does that answer your? Okay.
So for free time reading, you don't want them reading the same books you use for guided reading?
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
No, they don't read those books during free time reading.
Okay. Yeah, that answers it.
Any other questions? Yes? Mark?
So the new guided reading library is 4,800 books per building. Where do those live?
That is an excellent question, and Mrs. Bray and Dr. Wheeler and I have been discussing it, because as I did the math, I recognized that we would need to purchase bookshelves. And so I am looking at pricing of bookshelves. Right now, in the buildings, there are a couple of different options that I've been talking to principals. It varies building to building. Some of the buildings where they have had math kingdoms in the past, there's a lot of space there that could be split math kingdom and reading library. Each building is really kind of unique, but I have been talking to the principals at length about, if this is approved, we need to find shelving for 5,000 books, and I've been talking to Mrs. Bray about it as well. We do have the space in each building. It just looks a little different depending on the building's
Can you just
availability.
sort of give me a picture? How many linear feet of bookshelves
It's on the capital plan. No, I'm just kidding. Kidding.
I would have to get back to you with linear feet.
Yeah,
I
right.
apologize. I don't have that right now.
How about the picture on the slide?
Yeah, you can see that picture on the slide. It's quite extensive. I can say when
is that what we're looking at per building? That's
yeah,
something
I would
like
say
about
something
that size?
about that size. I mean, when I was principal, I had a 2-story building. Third, fourth, and fifth grade were on the second floor. K1 and 2 were on the first floor. Actually, I had 2 separate book rooms. The downstairs one went K to 3. The upstairs room went 2 to 5. Just so I didn't have teachers running up and down the stairs all day. The person that were coming, the academic coach, is coming from Owen J. Roberts School District. They have 2 full size book rooms that are about each the half a size of a regular size classroom. So it is a lot of space. It is a lot of books, but I think it's really what we need to have to get the job done, and we really don't have it at this point in time.
Titia?
To follow up on those books, to what extent can they be electronic books?
So that's an interesting question. Really, in K to 3, one of the things that's, I think, critically important is teaching students about how books work. One of the things we have to teach kindergartners initially is, how do you hold a book? What directions does text go? How do you turn pages? I mean, it seems very rudimentary, but concepts of print at those primary grades are really critically important. And there has been some research, and I can certainly get back to you with more specifics on it, about the importance in those early grades, again, in particular, of having actual paper books. One of the things I would reference in particular is when students in grades K to 2 are learning to read, one of the primary techniques that we focus on is using the pictures to provide clues for what the text is saying, so that they can begin to decode those words. It's much more difficult to do that often in an electronic book form than it is in a paper book form. So at this point, in K to 3, I think the paper books are really critically important. As we move into 4 and 5, I think it's certainly something that's worth researching. There has been some interesting research in the upper grades about using something like a Kindle, that when you have students who are reading at a lower grade level, they're not embarrassed about the book that they're choosing because no one can see what that book is. And so I think that could be an important part of our conversation as we look at what we're going to do with 4th and 5th grade the following year.
Yeah, and especially if you add sound and other things to it,
Correct.
there's a whole other dimension to it.
Absolutely.
The other question I had was more to do with the budget for math. I see a purchase of $75,000 in the following year for math. What's that?
Depending on the
representing?
outcome of the 612 math curriculum review, we need to reserve some funds. I had that, again, already thinking last year that in 1920 we may be purchasing additional materials depending on what the recommendation of the committee is. That's a placeholder for those materials.
That's a follow-up to that. I don't know how we might denote it on the budget. You had talked about some of the materials being online, some of them being, I know some of them are marked as textbooks. I don't know if there's a way maybe going forward to mark that, or
So it depends. So there are definitely, so you can see books and periodicals could be one place. We're really moving to this place. So do you see where science textbooks are on line 57, 640? It's a textbook, physical textbook, versus resources in 640, where you're kind of really looking at like books and periodicals. I'm sorry. Let me just go up. For some reason, in addition to coughing, my fingers aren't working very well, and I don't know why. So you see under General Supplies 610, Social Studies Resource Collection. So that's that online piece of it. So there's a way to differentiate, but I don't know if the budget codes have caught up with. Yeah.
that would be great.
Yeah.
So there's a way to do that specifically.
Yeah, okay.
Do you find now you either get online resources or textbooks, or are we ending up buying both in some cases?
I think I might be allergic to something in the ambient air because my eyes are starting to water now. So, when we adopted our social studies resources, we bought classroom sets of textbooks because sometimes that are shared, because sometimes teachers and students want the actual physical textbook, which we do not send home unless there's a special reason through an individualized education plan or somebody perhaps who's receiving some home instruction. Most students access those materials online. The online suite is much more powerful because those are places where we can now differentiate. The resources are vast. They're far beyond what could be in a textbook. It's a little bit hard to predict the future in terms of what it would look like in 3 to 5 years. One of the things our textbook companies are really trying to sell us 5, 6, and 7-year licenses for these things. And I think what we've learned is that really doing a 1 year at a time license, even though one doesn't receive the same reduction because we're not buying several years out, is probably the best way to go until we're really sure that that's the kind of resource we want in place for that length of time.
Thank you.
Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead. No, okay.
Will these online resources reflect new content? Because we're struggling with, we were talking about climate change in 6th grade the other day, and the last hurricane they talked about being the biggest hurricane was like several years ago. So are these materials going to catch up faster?
They do, and actually now I'm not sure if you're referencing our science or English language arts curriculum. Okay, so for English language arts, through my perspectives and the Pearson online platform, there's always nonfiction reading, often contemporary stories. For example, weather is a piece of that. That's updated, and so that is a benefit of an online resource. That you're not stuck in the old. You're able to provide new.
Go ahead.
Sure. If I go back to the guided reading materials, so over the past year, we spent roughly $220,000 for the RTI work. The previous year, we did $365 for the ReadyGen. And then on top of that, this is asking for roughly $175 for additional reading materials, EOA materials. So I guess my question is in terms of timing, in terms of throwing kind of a bunch of material, we're only in year 2 of ReadyGen, year 1 of the RTI implementation. Is this, once that's, I guess, a lot of materials at our teachers really fast, I guess, in terms of 1, 2, and 3. I'm not sure if a lot of the teachers have even got through a lot of the text that they already have. So I'm just wondering if we're purchasing too much too quickly.
I think that's a great question. We certainly have purchased quite a bit of curricular materials. I think this is a very different kind of a purchase. When we purchased ReadyGen, all teachers had to have significant professional development. They had to use it in a particular way every single day. Same thing with RTI. A lot of those interventions, particularly in Tier 2 and Tier 3, you had to learn them, you had to have professional development, this sort of thing. This is very different in that ReadyGen already requires that guided reading component. And what this allows teachers to have is choice and flexibility. It's not a program that they have to learn. It's not something that they have to get X number of books out of the library every day. But if I have students who need different levels than are provided in ReadyGen, Ms. Baldessano's class doesn't, I have the opportunity to go and get those resources. I don't have to struggle without resources or have my students read at levels that are inappropriate for them. So I'm actually right now going around and meeting with all of the grade level teams and showing the teachers the resources that we're talking about and gathering their feedback. And up to this point, I've just about finished Fort Washington and part of Maple Glen. The feedback is quite positive, that it's choice, it's opportunity, it's quality materials, and it's not by any stretch a program that requires professional development or has any mandates for teachers around how they'll utilize it. It's really providing them and their students with choice. I think the classroom books piece, I think many teachers, my sister taught second grade forever, and she was always scrambling to buy books for her classroom and get scholastic points and those sorts of things. And so I think I would be surprised to find any teacher who didn't appreciate the opportunity to have books available in their classrooms that they didn't have to go and secure by their own means through their own pocketbook or using the points to do that.
And actually, if I could go back to Matt. So in the same conversation that we had at the Education Committee meeting, I think there was, and I think this is what Mrs. Morrison was referencing, there was a transition period between the 5th grade and the 6th grade where we are transitioning our math curriculum. And you had mentioned at the time that Carnegie was the best selection, that there wasn't kind of these fill-ins, et cetera. At this present time, would there be a curriculum that we could choose that aligns itself so that that transition period wouldn't be one that may be difficult for our students?
Well, the most obvious answer, which I want to be just very clear, I'm not making a recommendation because I believe very strongly that one needs to do research and garner a lot of feedback in order to make that kind of decision. But at the time of adoption of Eureka, Great Minds hadn't built out their 6th to, well, it goes to 12th grade program yet. So we actually didn't have a choice in terms of adopting that program. Carnegie has never had an elementary program. Both Eureka and Carnegie continue to be very highly rated. They're both a standard. They're both aligned to the PA Core standard. Are there some differences in approach in terms of the representations that Eureka uses with tape diagramming specifically? I am very curious to know that the parent company of Eureka is Great Minds. I'm very curious to know what Great Minds does in the 6th to 12th grade band, because obviously as children grow, their need for conceptual representation doesn't have to necessarily be filled pictographically. Although it has been stated that 2/3 of the materials on the SAT test can be done through tape diagramming if one so chooses. So I think in terms of 5th to 6th grade alignment, we haven't had tremendous concern until this year. Part of that is that Carnegie produced brand new units that our teachers had to work with. So they got a new Carnegie program 3 years ago, and then in the 4th year, Carnegie revamped, and so the 6th grade teachers were sitting in front of a brand new unit in September. And so in addition to the new schedule and Schoology, I think that was a really heavy lift. So I think as things are settling down and we take a deeper dive into what exactly that integration looks like, it may not be as arch as it may be coming out to be.
Thank you.
May I just add a little bit to that? With the continuous curriculum review that we're going to be implementing in mathematics, I think we will be looking at Carnegie. We also will be looking at the scope and sequence of the courses that we're offering. We've reduced levels at the high school. We did that at the elementaries years ago. It's time now to look at that at the middle school. And I think that can only aid that integration between 5th and 6th grade. So I'm very much looking forward to the findings from this review committee.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from board members?
Yeah, I have a couple more actually, sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Actually,
Now's the time.
On STAR testing, just a quick question. So I noticed on the website, it's actually K-12, but we're only going to 11. Is there a reason why we're not adding the 12th?
So originally we went K-9 for mathematics because of the Algebra 1 Keystone, which the last year that students take the first sit for the first Keystone algebra is in 9th grade. K-10 for English Language Arts, because that's where our students take the Literature Keystone exam. This year, when we still were unsure if Keystones were counting towards graduation for the class of 1920, we thought, well, we have some students who are not proficient on the Keystone exam. Wouldn't it be nice if we had stars, a way to indicate some areas that they needed growth? And so we added and tested those students, and then we did provide opportunities through our enhancement period where our teachers worked specifically around areas that needed further teaching and practice for the students. Most school districts are very strong with computer adaptive assessments K through 8. I believe computer adaptive assessments at the high school are a bit of a new frontier. So far, our 9th and 10th grade English teachers and our 9th grade math teachers feel very positive about STAR. We've only administered one test, so it's very early to make that determination.
And the final question would be is, in regards to the budget presentation, it was mentioned earlier that there would be a possible request for 4 instructional specialists, and so that's not included in the presentation or the budget sheet as present.
That's correct, because that goes into our staffing, which is a whole different section of the budget, if you will.
Okay.
So we'll be doing all the staffing when we come back after the holiday break.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. If there aren't any other questions for our administrators, and it's okay with the board, I'm going to let them all go home for the evening. Thank you for your presentations. Not you two. Sorry. In any event, thank you, and we will look forward to more conversations about that. Yeah. Okay, so we'll move along here. Ms. Bray, do we have any announcement or communications?
Just one quick point to note. We received our 2016-17 single audit, so it may be included on the January 8th for acceptance.
Okay, great.
We just received it yesterday.
Okay. All good, I'm sure. Also, we have minutes from the November 16th meeting that will be moved on to the legislative meeting. If you have any comments or questions about it, let us know and let Brooke know. And I guess we'll move right on to the reports and recommendations. Our budget opt-out resolution, Ms. Bray, did you want to?
As in last year and as was discussed on December 11th, I guess it was,
right.
That we will be recommending that the opt-out resolution be approved on January 8th for 2018-19. That is a not to exceed the index of 2.4. Certainly the tax increase could be lower than that, but no higher.
Any comments, questions? Everyone all right with this? Go ahead, Rob.
Sure, I'll just take a quick step. So just to clarify, the opt-out resolution, basically, as you just stated, doesn't allow us to raise the tax increase above that 2.4. But given what it sounds like in terms of our budget, what you mentioned at the last legislative meeting as well, at status quo, without the increases of FTEs and other budget parameters, we would still be at a deficit, or it wouldn't cover the increases of salaries and the things that we'd already talked about. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So I guess my caution to the board, I guess, would be is the opt-out resolution at this point in time, given that the budget doesn't seem that clear, is it necessary that we would adopt this at this present time? I know it's our intention to try to keep it below the 2.4, but I guess the timing of it just seems...
Do you have a rough estimate of what exceptions and what they'd be worth?
Yeah, we did discuss that a little.
Yes, it was discussed, and since that time, now, do keep in mind that the 2018-19 forms are not available yet from PDE, but using last year's forms, and they have been fairly consistent, the PSERS exception for next year would yield less than $16,000, and we would not qualify for a special education. So the exceptions really would not help us.
And
Right.
is there what is the time frame? If we choose to do the opt-out resolution, there's a deadline for that, right?
Yes, it's, for us, because of the way our board meetings fall, it has to be January 8th unless we were to hold a special meeting. I believe it's January 31st. I'm sorry, I would want to check.
So there's not a lot of time to delay making that decision.
No,
anyway.
we cannot let it go until February.
Okay, is everybody good with that? Okay, thank you. I guess our next item is the Eastern Center for Arts and Technology budget, which is here in our agenda.
Yes, and the comparison to last year as well, we're down a bit, about $35,000, I believe, $32,000. And this Eastern has already done most of the work in order to get this to us for the board approval. And shortly after this, I will just say we'll be looking at MCIU budget.
Any observations, comments, questions on the Eastern resolution? Okay,
No.
I'm sorry, did you have anything?
No, I'm disappointed to see that it's gone down.
Right.
Because it means that we have less
fewer
kids on a
fewer
three-year
students
average.
participating.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do we have any observations on why that might be happening? No? Okay.
We find that our students sometimes are being waitlisted if they're not getting into the particular programs that they want. Some of the programs are very competitive. However, we also find that convincing folks in Upper Dublin of the benefits of the programming that's offered at Eastern has not been as fruitful as we would like. We are continuing that process. And
Yes.
we want to reiterate that there are great benefits to that program. So that is a work in progress.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that. If there are no other comments there, I guess we'll move on now to the next item, public official surety bond.
Tax collector was elected and will begin holding office on January 1st. But the bond for tax collectors are such that they're purchased really once every 4 years. We're part of the consortium for the county. There's an explanation here. And what we do, we have to pay for the entire bond up front, and then it becomes an accounting thing. Ms. Baldessano puts it on the balance sheet as a prepaid amount for the next 3 years.
Right.
So it's very...
Like an accrual, sort of.
Well, on the debit side. But
I know.
anyway.
That's my simplistic way of putting it. Yeah.
But anyway, it's based on a tax duplicate of about $75 million, and as you can see, it's $41,436.
Any other comments, questions about the surety bond? No? Okay. We'll move that forward if that's okay. Now we have the transfer, the general fund to capital projects fund.
Last month, there was a similar transfer. It was for the fourth of 4 years of the naming rights, $50,000. This is a transfer related to Upper Dublin Soccer Club and their support of the Cardinal Stadium project from a number of years ago. Receipt was just a little bit later, so we're transferring them separately. Money, just so that the new board members in particular know, has to be received through the general fund, and then it can be transferred to a different fund.
Okay. Is that, everybody good with that? We're fine with that? All right. Now our favorite budgetary transfers, which is a little longer list there.
Budgetary transfers are required at the end of the year. Again, I referred to our audit as having been sent to us. yesterday, the single audit completely. And what this shows are transfers of money that's available, that is, it ends in a positive amount for a particular line item, and to an area where we have a negative line item. So it's from a certain function object to which is positive to a function object that's negative. Budgets are always a roadmap at the beginning of the year, and things happen, and so monies need to be transferred.
Would you refer this to a little bit of a cleanup?
A little bit?
A
Yes.
little bit? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's definitely a cleanup. You may recall last year for 2016-17 was the first time that there were budgetary transfers taken care of during the year, and we will be bringing some more back
Right.
to you for 17-18 very soon.
Okay.
Any specific questions?
Anyone? No? Okay. Now, next item, fund depositories.
As the interest rates change, and been looking around at some other banking institutions that will afford us some opportunities to, shall we say, diversify where we have money invested. A number of years ago, well, over the past few years, a number of banks have completely got out of governmental banking. And so we've been doing our banking with a group called PSD-LAF, Pennsylvania School District Liquid Asset Funds. A number of our colleagues do that as well. And that's the front end of the operation. The back end, the banking institution, is PNC. I'm suggesting that we look at adding Fulton Bank. It's a $20 billion entity. There are no Montgomery County or Bucks County school districts yet using them as a depository, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about dipping our toe in the water and placing some CDs. Fulton has the capability of doing the full Act 72 collateralization, which a lot of banks don't do and aren't interested in doing because there's a cost related to that. And candidly, this is looking forward to perhaps doing an RFP and moving to a different institution down the line, but not necessarily moving to Fulton. Do not misunderstand. It's just, as I said, dipping our toe in the water and looking at perhaps placing our money some other places. We haven't done that since Citizens went out,
Right.
TD went out.
Santander went out.
Well, it was
Sovereign,
before
yeah.
it was Santander. So, and there's not many to choose from anymore.
Right. So this is just an action to make Fulton Bank an approved institution.
Best practices in our practices in January, July of each year, we approve all cooperative purchasing agreements that we use as well as depositories. So we would be covered under FDIC if I didn't bring it to the board for that, but I'd rather have board approval and talk about what we're going to do.
Right. Does anyone have any questions, comments? No? Okay. Well, we'll move that forward also, and then...
Just one
Oh, yeah.
quick, I'm sorry. I've just made it a little more difficult if we start investing those. Our monthly investment and treasurer's report will become longer if we invest in.
Sure.
So.
Sure. Absolutely.
She hasn't poked me with that yet. So.
Okay, thank you for that. And now, last but not least, the ever-popular IRS 2018 mileage rate.
It's just a matter of, again, best practice to put it on here so that when employees ask for mileage reimbursement after January 1, 2018, that we have the proper amount reflected. It's the first time the rates changed in a few years.
Okay. Anyone? Questions? No? Okay. Well, now is time for community input, but as I can tell you right now, there's no community here. So we won't be having community input. The next Finance Committee meeting will be January 18th in this room, immediately following the Operations Committee meeting, just as it was tonight. If there are no other comments or questions from anyone, we will adjourn. Thank you.